remember the heat of his breath on my neck. I remember his voice.
It was a crime wave like no other.
I was going down the hall and he was just hitting me. Socks stuffed in my mouth, blindfolded, gagged, hands tied, legs tied.
Spreading fear across Sacramento.
Gun sales are way up, with some of the buyers not that familiar with how to use firearms.
Then to the Bay Area and beyond.
I don't like it. It's getting too close to home.
His crimes escalating.
I heard 2 shots from inside the house.
As he eluded capture again and again.
If he was contacted on the street, he would be complacent, cooperative. However, if he was put in a threatening situation, he could be very dangerous.
Tonight, the crimes, the victims, and the new tool that detectives say finally ended their manhunt across California. He would become known by many names: ransacker, rapist, stalker, and killer, all of them striking fear, starting with a series of crimes that went largely unnoticed in the Central Valley. But that would change as the crime wave spread and the violence intensified. It is the story of a ruthless killer, terrorized communities, and determined detectives. It is a story that began more than 40 years ago. It was the mid-1970s, and America was in turmoil.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
In Washington, Richard Nixon had resigned amid scandal and disgrace. In Southeast Asia, the long, bitter, and divisive Vietnam War ended with the fall of Saigon.
The final evacuation of Americans from Saigon has been completed.
And in the small Central California farming town of Visalia, police were confronted with a growing crime wave. Beginning in March of 1974, possibly sooner, dozens of break-ins, possibly one murder, all believed to be the work of the same man. They dubbed him the Visalia Ransacker. A year would pass with no breaks in the case, no one arrested. Then, in late 1975, the crime wave ended. The following year, as America marked its 200th birthday,
I bet I have an emergency.
A new crime wave, this time in East Sacramento County, a more brazen series of burglaries, rapes, and murders. It started in June with a rape in Rancho Cordova.
I just remember feeling extremely threatened. After it was all over and done with, he went through the stuff in the room.
Come October, the attacks spread to Carmichael and Citrus Heights, bringing the number of rapes to 4. By the end of the year, 10 women had been raped in their homes in the middle of the night. Years later, victims still recalling the chilling details.
I remember the heat of his breath on my neck. I remember his voice. I remember the weight of his body and his knife. I remember it all too much.
At first, there was no reporting in the media, amid concerns that if word got out, the attacker would flee and never be found. When it finally did get out, the area was gripped by fear.
Gun sales are way up, with some of the buyers not that familiar with how to use firearms, and that can be dangerous.
There was a run on burglar alarms. So many requests, there were waiting lists to install them.
I don't like it. It's getting too close to home.
Plan on taking any precautions?
I put locks on my doors.
People bought air horns, installed peepholes, new locks, anything that could stave off an attack.
Ideally speaking, the potential victim is supposed to ward off her attacker with this device. Imported from Germany and firing 4 flash cubes simultaneously.
And the man responsible had an infamous new title, the East Area Rapist.
Sacramento's East Area Rapist has been active for 16 months, 15 victims. The pressure to catch this man has been mounting, but a multi-rapist often acts on impulse.
That pressure began to boil over amid fear and frustration.
I think that the reason there hasn't been something done about it is because it's a crime against women.
I don't know, I have a gun, but I still don't feel safe being, at home alone.
As the attacks continued, investigators began piecing together a possible profile. They believe he lived in the area. He might even be a police officer or a former police officer. some theorizing he was using a bike to avoid being seen.
The attack took place about 10 p.m.
Until this point, the East Area Rapist had only struck in Sacramento County, but that would soon change.
One of his few mistakes was to attack a woman who lived only 1 block inside Sacramento's city limits and then steal her car, which only brought in the city's rape detail and 4 more people to work toward catching him.
More investigators, more resources, but still no arrest, as the rapist became even bolder. He was now taunting his victims, leaving messages like this one on an answering machine. By the end of 1977, 19 more women had been attacked, bringing the total to 29.
If he was contacted on the street, he would be complacent, cooperative. However, if he was put in a threatening situation, he could be very dangerous.
The maps investigators displayed of targeted areas were now growing, and the threats continuing.
He told the female victim in effect that if he saw anything in the newspapers or on television or heard on the radio, anything about this latest attack, he would kill 2 people tonight.
Death threats would become part of the East Area Rapist MO, and there were other similarities. When he targeted the home of a couple, he would tie up the man and place dishes on his back. He'd then tell the couple if he heard a single dish break, he'd kill them both. Margaret Wardlow was just 13 when he tied up her mother and raped her.
He threatened everything with a harsh whisper, saying, "Do you want to die? Do you want to kill your mother?" And the minute you started to answer him, he would say, "Shut up, shut up, shut up."
She would be the youngest victim, but far from the last.
He was going down the hall and he was just hitting me. And then I just pretended that he knocked me out so he quit hitting me. And then I sock stuffed in my mouth, blindfolded, gagged, hands tied, legs tied. And he came in, I don't know, I think 5 different times or something like that over the course of the night and raped me.
For the last 9 years, Detective Carol Daly has counseled rape victims.
Detective Carol Daly was one of those working to catch the East Area Rapist.
A light is shining in the eyes. The woman is usually the first one to awaken, and the only thing that is visible is the round light and the shadow of a gun being pointed directly at her.
As the attacks continued, community groups met with police and sheriff's deputies.
Concern over rape is mounting in this community. Many of the same women at this workshop will gather again next month for a sheriff's talk on safety in the neighborhood.
That wasn't the only way women responded.
We believe that rapes cannot continue the way they have, and that we don't want to stand intimidated, and we don't want to live in fear that we are going to take action ourselves, and that we believe it's only when we join together with other women throughout Sacramento and don't just continue to rely on the police or just myself and my own home that we are going to be able to cause any kind of a change to happen.
Women gathered on the Sacramento courthouse steps, marching in support of rape awareness, demanding funding for rape crisis centers.
These women are taking their messages to the various law enforcement agencies and to the Board of Supervisors, but they're convinced the police cannot protect them against rape. They must protect themselves, and they've dedicated themselves to learning self-defense.
Protesters also focused on outdated phone systems that made it hard for victims to get hold of police. In 1977, emergency calls were still based on operators manually patching them through.
A recent rape victim had precious seconds to telephone for help. She dialed operator. Unfortunately, the operator did not come in on the line. Even when calling the local sheriff's office, when all circuits are tied up, the number still rings in an annex and cannot be heard or answered until a line clears.
At one point, police even suggesting it might be faster for victims to call a neighbor for help.
I imagine a lot of women in the area are scared and are nervous. If they could just kind of get to know each other's habits, their neighbors' habits, and call in if they see or hear anything suspicious at all. Don't be afraid to get involved.
But women were pushing back, asking for new technology, a way to prioritize emergency calls, something called the 911 system. Then came a new escalation.
I heard 2 shots from inside the house.
By February of 1978, the rapist had become a killer. Brian and Katie Maggiore were walking their dog in Rancho Cordova when they came upon him. They tried to run, but were shot and killed.
I could hear him falling in the bushes, and it took him a few seconds to get out of the bushes, but I could tell he was really scrambling.
A man out walking came face to face with their attacker.
Right as he came to the tree, he looked up and he saw me standing right here, and he was pretty surprised, and he just turned around as quick as he could. He just turned around and just headed straight down there towards the fire hydrant.
That witness was an art student and helped investigators come up with this sketch. But the East Area Rapist was still ahead of police and now moving beyond Sacramento County.
The rapist struck in North Modesto around 3 o'clock Monday morning.
2 rapes in Modesto in 1978, then Davis.
Much of the method of operation is the same, where he did enter a house where there were other people present outside of the victim. He bound his victim. He also left at an undetermined time, which is common. The victims are never sure when he leaves. There was a knife used, and he was wearing a mask or hood of some sort.
Other Bay Area cities would join the list, including Concord, San Ramon, San Jose, Danville, and Walnut Creek.
Police told me late today that this particular rape happened within 1 block of another rape that happened here in Rancho San Miguel on June 2nd. At that time, a 17-year-old girl was raped. That, too, is an East Area Rapist suspect case.
By the summer of 1979, dozens of rapes and 2 murders had been attributed to the East Area Rapist. And then, nothing. No more rapes and no more murders. But the nightmare wasn't over. When we come back, a new crime wave in a new part of California, and the new tool that investigators say would finally end their manhunt across California. By the beginning of the 1980s, one thing was clear. The East Area Rapist was no longer active in Sacramento. What was unclear was why. Investigators say the answer would finally come nearly 2 decades later, the case of the East Area Rapist taking a dramatic and sinister new turn.
In 1998, Contra Costa County submitted its DNA evidence to Orange County.
It was now the late 90s. For 2 decades, police in Southern California had been confounded by another crime wave. But now they also had another tool.
But as I, sat and thought about it, I realized this is potentially a big deal.
New DNA technology had made a connection between an East Area Rapist case in the Bay Area and a killer in Southern California, dubbed the original Night Stalker. His crime spree had begun in 1979, the year the East Area Rapist seemingly vanished from Northern California.
My dad was bound. I don't know if Charlene was bound as well. She was absolutely brutally raped.
Investigators connected the Night Stalker to rapes and murders in Santa Barbara, Ventura, and Orange counties. 12 murders and 50 rapes in all. They were hoping that DNA would take down the killer.
And is either in a database somewhere or is waiting to be put into a database. When that happens, then there will be the hit.
The investigators had the right idea. DNA was becoming a powerful new tool for law enforcement, but they had no idea that it wasn't a criminal database that they would need. By 2016, the suspected Visalia ransacker, the East Area Rapist, and the Night Stalker now had another name, the Golden State Killer.
Because of the fact of the age of the crimes and the age that this individual may be, certainly this is one of our last opportunities to get this individual identified.
That opportunity came, and from an unlikely source.
Know how your DNA connects you to the world.
Someone, somewhere, had submitted a sample of their DNA to a genealogical website, hoping to learn more about their ancestry. Their DNA ended up on a database called GEDmatch.
Literally a simple table that indicates how much DNA that person shares with the profile that I uploaded, and then gives the username and the email address of the person that is matching.
Investigators took DNA from a Golden State Killer crime scene, added it to the GEDmatch database, and waited, but not for long. They didn't find their suspect, at least not directly, but they did find a close relative. And in April of last year, that DNA led investigators to this unremarkable, well-maintained home at 8316 Canyon Oak Drive in Citrus Heights, right in the middle of the East Area Rapist old hunting ground. It was the home of Joseph James D'Angelo. From Visalia to Sacramento to the Bay Area to Southern California and then back here to Sacramento County, prosecutors were convinced their manhunt was almost over.
We were looking for a needle in a haystack, but we also all knew that the needle was there.
As detectives closed in, they followed D'Angelo to this Hobby Lobby store nearby, swabbed a door handle of his car while he shopped inside. Detectives came away with DNA they say nearly matches DNA left at a crime scene 4 decades ago.
He had 20 out of 21 that matched perfectly.
But prosecutors wanted a totally perfect match. 5 days later, detectives combed through D'Angelo's trash and came away with a tissue that showed a perfect match.
Now you're not dealing with having to interpret a mixture. You're saying this is the same guy as that guy. The Golden State Killer, who left his DNA in multiple cases back in the 1970s and 1980s, is Joseph D'Angelo.
Investigators arrested D'Angelo the next day.
The answer has always been in Sacramento.
Meantime, for prosecutors, the pieces were coming together in other ways. In the early 1970s, during the time of the Visalia ransacker, D'Angelo worked as a police officer in Exeter, a small community just east of Visalia. During the time of the East Area Rapist, he was with the nearby Auburn Police Department. Prosecutors from Northern and Southern California say he is the man who terrorized communities from one end of California to the other for decades.
He's been called the East Side Rapist. He's been called the Visalia Ransacker, the original Night Stalker, and the Golden State Killer. Today, it's our pleasure to call him defendant.
Tonight, Joseph James D'Angelo has not been convicted of anything. He sits in a Sacramento jail cell, accused of 13 murders and multiple other crimes. Prosecutors from 4 California counties say they will seek the death penalty. His next court appearance isn't for months. A trial could be years away. But our story doesn't end there. Joseph D'Angelo might still be a free man had he not crossed paths with an 80-year-old retiree in South Florida. When we continue, the science, tools, and techniques that put D'Angelo behind bars now being applied to other cases across the country, and the results are nothing less than stunning. Tracking down the East Area Rapist turned Golden State Killer would take decades. Serial murders, rapes, burglaries, all across this state, the cases going unsolved. That is, until a monumental breakthrough by an unlikely team in a place you might never have imagined. 3,000 miles from California, along the Florida coast, inside this modest 1927 house, Curtis Rogers carries an unsuspecting key.
My office is in here.
The 80-year-old retiree unlocking one of California's most heinous crime sprees.
My files and everything for GEDmatch, I do it all in here.
When a knack for ancestry transformed from hobby into genealogy website, GEDmatch.
Let's start a site where we can help as many people as possible who are doing family genealogy.
But the voluntary online DNA database has now also become a powerful new tool for solving cold cases.
But I didn't really consider law enforcement as being one of those purposes.
He learned about the arrest of Joseph D'Angelo just like the rest of us.
There was an announcement that the Golden State Killer was caught, and I just kind of casually said to my wife, do you suppose we were involved in that?
For-profit genealogy companies like 23andMe and Ancestry.com require a subpoena or search warrant from law enforcement, but GEDmatch is a free, public, voluntary DNA database accessible to anyone, including detectives.
It took me about 2 weeks really to wrap my head around what was happening.
With the arrest of James D'Angelo, interest by law enforcement has skyrocketed. In the year since, 59 other cold case arrests have been made, slightly more than one a week on average. And just months after the Golden State Killer, this unprecedented DNA legwork led to another major break in a Sacramento cold case.
That has always been the case, really, you might say that has haunted me.
Detective Avis Berry has been leading the NorCal Rapist investigation, an unsolved spree of at least 10 sexual assaults on women across 6 counties between 1991 and 2006.
It bothered me daily sometimes, thinking about what could we do, what could we do more.
Then, in September, genetic genealogy led to the arrest of Roy Charles Waller, the UC Berkeley employee living unsuspectingly in Northern California for decades.
He wasn't on anyone's radar, so I don't think we would have found him without a genealogy type of tool.
This groundbreaking use of DNA databases to track and crack cold cases is exciting and enticing, but it also raises some concerns about privacy, ethics, legal rights, and more. But whatever risks may be ahead, Rogers believes the benefits of justice, however overdue, are undeniable and profound. And that may bring some comfort and closure to the victims, their families and friends, and to anyone who lived in so much fear for so long. It may also bring satisfaction for the detectives who pursued this case across California, across the decades. As for Joseph D'Angelo, we don't know what he makes of all this, what strategy his legal team will pursue, the issues they may raise in his defense, how the courts will rule on the evidence gathered against him. But one thing does seem certain. Beginning with this manhunt across California, the rules and tools have changed forever.